All the second stage tanks now pressurized. 35 seconds and counting. We are still 30 seconds and counting. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 25 seconds. 20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
I welcome this kind of examination.
We came?
And for the international order that we have worked for generations to build.
A new world order. New world order.
We saw?
If suddenly there was a threat to this world from some other species, from another planet, outside in the universe.
Always talk to you like they're the best. And then we're going to Washington, D.C. to take back the White House!
He died.
Ah!
He died.
But that's a wicked woman.
Because people have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
You can keep it. Period. 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 They are the focus of evil in the modern world. It's a catastrophe.
Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome.
This is the Midnight Rider News Podcast. Welcome to the inaugural episode of the Midnight Rider News Podcast. This is St. Patrick, your host, and I'm also the editor-in-chief of MidnightRiderNews.com. Before going any further, I'd like to remind you that in our name, Midnight Rider News, writer is spelled W-R-I-T-E-R, as in someone who writes. We will come to you twice monthly with special episodes dropping periodically throughout the year. Stay tuned to MidnightRiderNews.com for archives and previews of our upcoming shows. Through the website, you'll also be able to send in questions for future guests. That said, you may have noticed that our tagline on the website is where the difference is history. There are two reasons for that. One, history is my background. I taught high school history for close to 10 years, and I'm still a fan of the field and those who teach it well. Second, however, I'm not a fan of the mainstream media and their perversion of history, culture, and frankly, the truth. So part of our goal is to shine some light on the historical distortions of our news media, our school textbooks, and the conventional wisdom of North American knowledge and opinion that has been so shaped and molded by this mainstream media. But rather than being a candle, we'd really like to be a spotlight. Keep in mind, this is just a dream project for us at this point. Everyone is working on the site for no pay and no profit. The site is totally fueled by dreams and donations from listeners like you. We've added a donation button to the site, so please help us if you like what you hear and if you can. We thank you for joining us both on the podcast and on the MidnightRiderNews.com website. Tonight's featured guest will be Gary Fannin, JFK researcher and author of The Innocence of Oswald. You can get Gary's book through a link at the MidnightRiderNews.com website. Tonight's first guest on the Midnight Rider News podcast will be Juliet Toth. Juliet is a member of the Midnight Rider News team. She will be adding some important alternative health information to the site, and I know you're going to want to read that. But tonight, however, she's here to tell us about Lee Harvey Oswald and his time in New Orleans. This episode 001 is entitled The Innocence of Oswald. Juliet conducts Oswald-based tours in New Orleans and has become a foremost expert on his time there, especially his time in 1963. So, Juliet, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much.
Juliet, the Oswald story in New Orleans is a story so undertold, yet I believe so important. I think Oliver Stone did tell it well in the 1991 film JFK, but there was, as we've since seen, so much more to the story. What first interested you in Oswald's New Orleans story?
I did see the JFK film a few years after it came out, and I was fascinated by the movie. I think Oliver Stone did a wonderful job, and I was also very angry and pretty disturbed. To be honest with you, I never believed that Oswald was the lone assassin, and I was a history major, and I'm always fascinated with finding out the truth and historical knowledge. And in 2007, actually July of 2007, the Gambit Weekly, which I actually have right here and will be posted to your website, came up with an article about the JFK assassination through a book by Ed Haslam called Dr. Mary's Monkey. The Gambit Weekly, it's called Missing Pieces, a new book connects a long unsolved New Orleans murder, the AIDS epidemic, cancer, and the JFK assassination. I read the article. I became obsessed, actually, with the assassination and the New Orleans connections, that I became interested in doing my own research. I visited all the sites that were mentioned and absorbed as much information as I could. I actually worked at an archive here in town at the time called Notarial Archives Research Center. So I learned how to do research, more, let's say, unusual types of research, maybe where you really have to dig and you have to talk to people and find things out and not necessarily take everything at face value.
Right.
But anyway, I became so intrigued that I wanted to find out more, and that led me to where I am right now as an advocate, believing that Oswald is definitely innocent.
So there seems to be a lot of anti-communist activity in New Orleans, as well as in Dallas and Miami in 1963. Could you describe the Cold War environment of New Orleans in 1963?
Absolutely. New Orleans was a port city, but it was a bigger port city, more important at that time, rivaling New York, Boston, places like that. It was also a huge intelligence center. CIA offices here, FBI, naval intelligence, because of its proximity and strategic location. And also, it was pretty close to Cuba. Now, at the time, think about this, in the 1950s, early 1960s, the mob is pretty much running New Orleans under the auspices of Carlos Marcello. He was a crime boss here. He referred to himself as a tomato salesman, and he pretty much, he had offices in the French market, and believe it or not, people did believe he was a tomato salesman.
Well,
However,
I think he was a tomato salesman, sort of like Al Capone had a candy store, so...
Absolutely, and there always is some kind of front or cover. And we also have to realize that sometimes things aren't as they seem or as they seem on face level. So we get into Carlos Marcello being quite a character in New Orleans, and he has connections in Dallas. He has connections in Florida with other mobsters there, Trafficante and Giacana. These guys all work together. And the strange thing is, the CIA is very mob-connected at this time, too. People tend to want to separate those two entities, and you really can't, especially in the early 1960s.
Right.
So what's really going on in New Orleans at that time? It's pretty fascinating. Well, we know the mob and the CIA are both really angry at Fidel Castro. And unfortunately, Mr. Castro did pass away recently. May he rest in peace. But it's strange that he lived to be 90. I read somewhere, I think there were 300 and some assassination attempts on his life. They were coming up with the strangest, most bizarre ways of getting rid of Fidel Castro. And believe it or not, I think one of the eeriest ways is they were actually, as it's mentioned in the book Dr. Mary's Monkey, they were going to try to make a cancer-causing bioweapon at a secret laboratory, which was here in New Orleans, of all places. And it just fits in with the deep underbelly that New Orleans was already known for and is still known for.
Now, how was Lee Harvey Oswald involved in that bioweapon?
Interestingly enough, in the spring of 1963, Lee Harvey Oswald shows up in New Orleans. Now, why? Why does he show up here?
Right.
At the same time, a young woman who's been doing cancer research for many years as a high school student, she happens to show up in New Orleans at this time. She's asked to come here by Dr. Alton Ochsner of Ochsner Clinic, a world-renowned cancer doctor, world-renowned blood specialist. She's asked to come to New Orleans to work on this project. And it works out perfectly because no one knows who she is. She's only a 19-year-old teenager who just happens to be a cancer expert at the time. She comes to New Orleans and meets some other notorious characters within a few days. If you'll remember in the movie JFK, there's a strange-looking character played by Joe Pesci named David Ferry.
Right.
He actually referred to himself as Dr. David Ferry. And he is involved in this project too, believe it or not. The man was a genius. He may have been, again, another one of these right-wing anti-communist people, very well connected with the mob and CIA, and he was a pilot for Carlos Marcello. A lot of people don't realize that.
Mm-hmm. Now, who is this 19-year-old that Lee Harvey Oswald meets in New Orleans?
Her name is Judith Very Baker, and her book came out a few years ago, and it's called Me and Lee, and I highly recommend it. Ed Haslam's first book actually came out in 1995, I believe, and it's called Mary Ferry and the Monkey Virus. And he talks about the underground laboratory because Jim Garrison, the DA at the time, the one the movie JFK is based on, he actually talked about, in an interview with Playboy magazine in 1967, he actually talked about the cancer laboratory or secret cancer laboratory. And Ed Haslam had already heard things as a teenager here, so he put the pieces together. Now, the reason he changed the book to Dr. Mary's Monkey is he added some chapters, and through the TV show 60 Minutes, he was able to meet Judith Very Baker, who was the technician at this cancer lab in New Orleans. Unfortunately, 60 Minutes, because of some issues with the people in higher-up positions, they did not continue, and they did not air the episode.
Well, that's not a surprise to me, seeing that the anchor at CBS News at this time was Dan Rather, who seems to believe that Oswald acted alone and will probably go to his grave saying that Oswald acted alone.
We've caught him on many lies, and I know the JFK research community has no respect for Dan Rather because he lied about the Zapruder film. Mainstream media cannot be trusted, as you and I both realize.
Right, absolutely. Now, it's interesting to me also the story about Reilly Coffee in New Orleans. This is where Oswald worked, right?
Yes, and coincidentally, Judith Very Baker and Lee Harvey Oswald started working at Reilly the same day. And their apartments were very close to each other. According to Judith, Lee was able to get her the apartment right off of Magazine Street in New Orleans, so they were able to ride the bus together to Reilly Coffee every day. Now, the strange thing is there's some time cards, and if you look at the time cards that were published by the Warren Commission, they're not the original time cards. Now, this is something that really got me thinking, and just about how shady the Warren Commission really was in their investigation of the JFK assassination. The time cards in the Warren Commission, which you can look up online, are just typed up by someone, and they show Lee's comings and goings pretty much that summer of 63. However, about 25 years ago, the original time cards from Reilly Coffee Company surfaced in an FBI file, I believe, at the National Archive. And lo and behold, there's a little J initial, exactly the way Judith Very Baker makes her day on each of those time cards. She was Moynihan's secretary, and he was the supervisor. And Judith had to give permission for Lee to come and go as he pleased because they were working on the cancer project. And again, this is top secret, but Alton Ochsner was really good friends with William Reilly, who owned Reilly Coffee Company, and they were both very conservative, anti-communist, right-wing, wealthy gentlemen who were, again, part of the upper crust of New Orleans society at that time.
Well, it's sometimes hard for me to believe that Oswald, if he was a communist, as the Warren Commission, Gerald Posner, and Dan Rather would have us believe, would keep surrounding himself not just with anti-communists ideologically, but anti-communists who were either working to overthrow or financially supporting the overthrow of Castro at this time. And this is not just in New Orleans. This is also in Dallas, where he's surrounded by the Payne family and George de Mohrenschildt. And again, anti-communists. Now, it seems odd to me that a rabid Marxist, which is what we're supposed to believe, would constantly keep surrounding himself with anti-communists.
Yes, that is certainly true. We know that there was a fake defector program, and more research and information has come out that Oswald was definitely a part of a fake defector program sent to the Soviet Union. Although he wasn't supposed to stay as long as he did end up staying in the Soviet Union, the only person who was able to get him back into the United States was the Attorney General, Bobby Kennedy. So again, that kind of tells you something too.
Absolutely.
We know that Oswald had intelligence connections. There is absolutely no doubt. According to Judith Very Baker, Oswald was an FBI informant, and he worked for the CIA. And he was playing both sides, or he was being told to play both sides. One day he might have been acting like he was pro-Castro. The next day, the total opposite. So what was really going on? Someone was pulling the strings, and he was sort of the puppet, I guess we could say.
Now, so you believe he was both FBI and CIA, correct?
I do. I absolutely do. And one of the reasons for that is right around the corner from Reilly Coffee Company, there just happens to be the office of an ex-FBI guy from Chicago named Guy Bannister. Now, funny thing is about Guy Bannister, his office was 544 Camp Street. Well, those pro-Castro flyers that were being handed out by Oswald near the International Trade Mart, some of them were stamped with the address 544 Camp Street. And that is what led Garrison to start his investigation that something deeper is going on here. Something really dark and deeper is happening.
You know, and I think it's my contention that I find the New Orleans story and the characters in the New Orleans story more fascinating even than the characters in Dallas. And because part of it seems so historical, yet part of it seems just so bizarre. I mean, you couldn't almost make up characters like Guy Bannister and Shaw. And it's amazing what's really going on around Oswald in New Orleans, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. According to the book Dr. Mary's Monkey, Lee was pretty much a handler for the materials of the bioweapon, and he was supposed to go to Mexico City to deliver the bioweapon to a contact who would later bring it to Cuba and have a doctor inject Fidel Castro with a vaccination that would have been for something else, and it would have unfortunately gave him cancer in 28 days. According to the tests that were done on human subjects in Angola, or prisoners from Angola at Jackson Mental Hospital, they were taken there. The prisoners who were injected died within 28 days.
That's right. And if I remember right, Judith Very Baker said she didn't know what was really going on there, right?
she ended up having an ethics issue. She was told that they were going to be injecting people who were already really sick with something else, or they were going to be dying soon anyway, and that's not true. She found out they were normal, healthy subjects. Maybe 2 or 3 of them were injected, and within 28 days, they were dead. That's how they knew the bioweapon was going to work on humans.
Well, I think it's safe to say that this story is vast, but it's also murky to some degree in some ways. But what it also says to me, however, is that he's not alone, he's not a nut, and he's not a communist. So what part of the New Orleans story to you leads to Oswald's innocence in Dallas?
Well, all of these strange connections in New Orleans, absolutely. The timing of everything, the pro-Castro, anti-Castro environment in New Orleans at that time, everything, and also New Orleans being so mob-connected and CIA-connected, there's just such a majority of information. And if you also remember at the beginning of the JFK movie, a woman is thrown out of her car and she ends up in the hospital. That's Rose Cheramy. Rose Cheramy warned the authorities and people at the hospital about the JFK assassination a day or 2 before it happened. The Warren Commission ignored anything and didn't want to hear anything else that went against the lone nut assassin. So there was an obstruction of justice, no doubt. And we really believe, too, since there was a plot in Chicago, a lot of people don't realize that there was a very similar plot to assassinate JFK in Chicago. Now, the strange thing is, they did have an ex-Marine as a patsy, but the stranger thing is a man named Lee informed the Chicago FBI that a plot was in the making, and they were able to stop it, and I believe that trip was canceled. Now, I just think it's very interesting that a man named Lee happened to contact the FBI. Now, these are things that didn't come out until many years later, and some of the things I talk about, too, with the mental hospital and the research and the Clinton incident, which everyone pretty much knows about, that's where that Jackson State Mental Hospital was, where witnesses actually saw Clay Shaw, David Ferry, and Lee Harvey Oswald together in the small little town of Clinton, Louisiana in August 1963. That's when they were delivering the bioweapon to do the testing on the prisoners of Angola. Now, the interesting thing of how we know about witness testimony is in the late 70s, as you know, the church committee reopened the case and wanted to investigate, once again, the JFK assassination. They called witnesses from all over. A lot of this stuff was stamped top secret, and it wasn't allowed to be released until, again, after the JFK movie, there was so much controversy and people were so angry that, yes, there was a bunch of documents that were released. And I'm not sure if you're pretty familiar with that angle, too.
Well, there's so much more to this story that we could discuss this evening, but we're going to have to do so at a later date. In fact, we'll probably have a whole episode on this issue itself. If some of our audience would like to contact you, how would they do that?
I'd be happy to give them my info. My email is Juliet, that's Juliet, Toth, Toth, MWN, @gmail.com.
Okay, that's Juliet Toth, MWN, @gmail.com. Juliet, thank you so much for being on the team, and thank you so much for being on the show tonight.
I enjoyed it, and thanks so much for having me. It's wonderful, and I'm so glad that you're getting the real truth out there. More news networks need to be like that and pursue the truth.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
What kind of a peace do I mean, and what kind of a peace do we seek? Not a Pax Americana, enforced on the world by American weapons of war. Not the peace of the grave or the security of the slave. I am talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living, the kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and build a better life for their children. Not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, but peace in all time. I speak of peace, therefore, as the necessary, rational end of rational men. I realize the pursuit of peace is not as dramatic as the pursuit of war, and frequently the words of the pursuers fall on deaf ears. But we have no more urgent task. Our problems are man-made, therefore they can be solved by man, and man can be as big as he wants. No problem of human destiny is beyond human beings. Man's reason and spirit have often solved the seemingly unsolvable, and we believe they can do it again. And if we cannot end now our differences, at least we can help make the world safe for diversity. For in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's futures, and we are all mortal.
John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the 35th and youngest president in United States history, was killed on November 22, 1963 in a motorcade in Dealey Plaza in Dallas, Texas. The accused killer of JFK was Lee Harvey Oswald. Tonight we have Gary Fannin, the author of The Innocence of Oswald and the owner of www.theinnocenceofoswald.com. So, how are you doing tonight, Gary?
I'm doing great, S.T. How are you, sir?
Hey, I'm doing fine. It was great to meet you in Dallas at the 4th Annual JFK Assassination Conference. What a fantastic conference that was.
It was a great time, and, I've been doing these shows, conferences for 20-some years, and the guests that Judith had and the overall theme, it was one of the best shows I've ever been at.
I really thought the quality of speaker at the conference was amazing. What a collection of knowledge and talent.
Unbelievable.
And what I was most interested in was the seems to be opinion that Lee Harvey Oswald was completely innocent of the crimes in Dallas. And you have written The Innocence of Oswald because in your 37 years of work, you have come to the conclusion that Lee Harvey Oswald was not just part of a larger conspiracy, but was totally innocent of all the crimes. Now, one question that I would have you explain, or to start with, for our audience, is this. Lee Harvey Oswald was a 24-year-old Marine who was in Dallas, Texas at this time, obviously. But in general, who was Lee Harvey Oswald?
Well, Lee Harvey Oswald is really a mystery to history. He joined the Marines at a very young age, specialized in the Russian language, learned photography. He was in charge of aerial reconnaissance of Russia with the U-2 spy plane. He had the highest security clearance you could have as a Marine, and he has this image of being just a total loser, and that's not the way he was at all. He actually had a very high IQ. Like I said, he had the highest security level you could get. He was trained at Camp Perry with the CIA, which is what they call the farm, which is where they send their top recruits. So, unfortunately, history has labeled this guy as a loser, a nobody, and in reality, he was 180 degrees from that completely.
Well, there are really only three options: that he acted alone, that he acted as part of a conspiracy, or that he didn't act at all. I mean, right?
Yes.
And Gerald Posner seems to believe that he acted alone.
I've got Gerald's phone number if you want it.
No, thanks. I think I'm going to have to pass on that for right now, but thanks, Gary. So The idea or the motive purported by the Warren Commission was that he was a communist. Is there any chance that you think he was a communist at all?
Not at all. And I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here, ST, but in my book, I do have a document in there that shows that when he went to Russia, he went on behalf of the U.S. intelligence, primarily the CIA, and he was kind of a double agent, as most spies are, because obviously if you're going from the U.S. to Russia, unless you're giving them some sort of secrets or fake secrets from the United States, why do they have an interest in you coming to their country? So he's got this enigma that he's a communist, but he is 180 degrees away from being a communist. He was a dedicated Marine.
Right.
He did what he was asked to do.
Right.
And the best way that I can state that, he wasn't a communist and that he wasn't defecting is even when Lee Oswald was ready to come back to the United States with his Russian-born wife, Marina, and their daughter, I believe he had $214 in his bank account, and the airline tickets for him and his wife and daughter to fly over back in 1962, I believe, was like $1,500, and the State Department loaned him that money for him to come back. If he was a communist, they would have not have loaned him money. He would have been debriefed by the CIA as soon as he stepped off the plane. Again, he's not a communist. He was a dedicated Marine and thought he was working for naval intelligence and the CIA in doing what was needed during the Cold War period.
Now, there is a tape of him saying a Marxist. I believe it's from a show in New Orleans. And I guess the question is, there might be some ideological parsing between Marxist and communist, but was he a Marxist maybe?
Correct. Yeah, he said that on the WDSU interview in New Orleans. And this was after he was arrested, supposedly for fighting with Carlos Berenguer. WDSU had both of them on their program. And he said, that he was a Marxist, but he wasn't a Leninist. And, there was a difference between an outright communist. So, again, I don't know the full schematics of that, but, again, he was a dedicated Marine throughout, and unfortunately, history is labeled otherwise.
So the two options are that he was a Marxist at that time, or that someone was urging him to say he was a Marxist. You believe what?
I think he was told to say he was a Marxist. And, even, and again, we're skipping ahead here a little bit, but even when he was arrested in Dealey Plaza, at the Texas Theater and taken to the Dallas County Jail, even the arresting officer and the main guy over the investigation, Jim Lavelle, said all of his answers seemed to be rehearsed. Okay, so obviously he was trained very well. Yeah, he was trained very well. And Jim Lavelle at that time had been, with the police force, for probably close to 20 years.
One thing that doesn't seem very hotly debated about that day is that Lee Harvey Oswald was somewhere in Dealey Plaza and somewhere around the Texas School Book Depository. So where do you think he was on that day and in Dealey Plaza?
Well, if you believe the Warren Commission report, he's on the 6th floor southeast corner window. But according to his own testimony, when he was arrested, Captain Fritz asked him where he was at, and he said he was out front with Bill Shelley, which was another employee of the School Book Depository building. And in the Alkin 6 photograph, when you look at the very back of it, there's a person that looks very similar to Lee Harvey Oswald, again, looking at the motorcade. Robert Groden, who is an expert in photography, said that this is Billy Nolan Lovelady. Other people have said, well, Oswald is the guy that has his hands up shielding his face. Other people say, well, he's in the back left corner. You don't even see him in the Alkins. Regardless of which image you think he is, again, if he had went to trial, they would have had to have proven that he was not, out front with Bill Shelley as he spoke. And even Chief of Police Jesse Curry said, we can't put him in the window with that rifle with a motive. So, again,
right.
If he had gone to trial, they would have had to prove that he wasn't out front.
Yeah, that is the case. There was so much going on in Dealey Plaza at that time, and in fact that entire day. What is it about Dealey Plaza and everything surrounding Dealey Plaza that leads you to his innocence?
Well, the biggest thing would be, ST, is the motorcade was running 15 minutes late. Okay, if Oswald is the, quote, lone assassin, and he's up there in the 6th floor southeast corner window, he would have no way of knowing that the motorcade is running late. JFK was supposed to give a speech at the Trade Mart at 12:30. Oswald was spotted by several employees in the lunchroom at 12:25 having his lunch. Well, if he's the assassin and he's up there at 12:15 when the car is supposed to be coming by, he would have stayed there until the car came by. He wouldn't have been walking down to the lunchroom on the 2nd floor at 12:25 to be spotted by other employees and at the same time say he was out front with Bill Shelley at the time of the assassination. So to me, that's the biggest key, that he wasn't involved. And also, when you look at the fact that, again, I'm skipping ahead a little bit here in my book, but when you look at the Malcolm Wallace fingerprint that was listed and not identified for 35 years, this was an LBJ henchman that, his fingerprint was listed off of a box in the southeast corner of the 6th floor window and went unidentified for 35 years. And again, you put those two together, it just doesn't match up. The guy was totally innocent.
Well, the question I have is, supposedly Mac Wallace's fingerprints are on a box in the school book depository at that time, at the window that supposedly also held Lee Harvey Oswald. But the one thing I've never understood about the Mac Wallace story, and it still kind of bothers me, is if it was Mac Wallace in the school book depository shooting at the place that was supposedly Oswald, then someone would have had to have seen Mac Wallace around the school book depository. Is there anyone who did?
Well, there are eyewitnesses that said that they saw a guy with horn-rimmed glasses, in the 6th floor window, which Mac Wallace wore. Again, the biggest thing that I would say on that is not relying necessarily on eyewitness testimony, but at the time that this assassination occurred, the Texas School Book Depository building was being renovated, and so they had a lot of unscheduled workers and contractors and so forth in the building. So somebody could have easily have slipped in, under a fake disguise or saying, "Hey, I'm the electrician here to redo this," or whatever. So again, I don't put a lot of faith into eyewitness testimony stating that Mac Wallace was there. I do put a lot of faith in the fact that his fingerprint was listed and was identified originally as a 14-point match and later confirmed as a 34-point match. And I believe it only takes 10 or 11 points to be admissible in court.
Right, yeah, I think it does. So do you believe that Mac Wallace shot from the Texas School Book Depository?
Most definitely.
So do you think the shooters were triangulated? Do you think there were 4 locations? Do you think there were more? Do you think there was only one? How would you explain that?
I think there was actually more locations than that, ST. I've got Mac Wallace in the southeast corner window. I have another shooter in the southwest corner of the 6th floor. I have 2 shooters on top of the county records building, which is the white building on the corner of Houston and Elm. And it's important to realize that building in 1963 was the sheriff's office. So if you had somebody on the roof of that building in a police uniform, a sheriff's uniform, with a gun, you wouldn't think anything of it. You would just think they would be part of the security. I have a shooter on the South Knoll as well as the Grassy Knoll. I have a shooter in the Daltex building, and I know it sounds like, wow, I've got 35 people shooting at JFK. That's
a lot of shooters.
It's not the case, but it was definitely a triangulation crossfire. But the reason why I have the people where I do is based off of the ballistics and the scientific evidence. I looked at Governor Connolly's suit at the University of Texas in Austin, and where the bullet holes go through the back of the jacket, to the front of the jacket, through his shirt, into the right wrist. Even if you move the right wrist up 3 or 4 inches, not knowing exactly where it's at, when you trace that line back, it puts you at the rooftop, actually between the top window and the rooftop of that county records building. So when you trace that line of sight back, that means somebody had to be shooting from the roof.
Yeah, it sure does. Unlike the researchers who have been overly careful about naming names, you and Jim Marrs have both named the Grassy Knoll shooter. And we're going to talk about that when we come back. When you want an alternative perspective that challenges the way we think, the way we are taught, and the way we believe, go to MidnightRiderNews.com and read the works of S.T. Patrick, Juliet Toth, and the rest of the Midnight Rider News team. At MidnightRiderNews.com, we speak truth to power, we fight for justice for those who've been treated unjustly, we challenge societal norms, and we always question authority. Please join us at MidnightRiderNews.com today. That's Midnight Writer, WRITER, news.com. Welcome back to the Midnight Rider News Podcast. I'm S.T. Patrick. This is episode 001, The Innocence of Oswald, and we're here with the author of The Innocence of Oswald, Gary Fannin. And Gary's already told us that his idea of the shooter in the schoolbook depository is Mac Wallace. Now he's about to tell us who he believes the shooter was on the Grassy Knoll. Coincidentally, he agrees with Jim Marrs, or maybe I should say Jim Marrs agrees with Gary Fannin. So, Gary, without further ado, who was the shooter on the Grassy Knoll?
It's a gentleman by the name of Roscoe White. Roscoe White was a Dallas police officer at the time, but he did not have his job at the Dallas Police Department until October of '63, the same time that Lee Harvey Oswald got his job at the book depository. I have copies, and I saw the originals. Gary Shaw, who is one of the first generation researchers, he has all of the Roscoe White memorabilia, and it's at the Baylor University Library, the Pogue Library in Waco, Texas. And the three things that convinced me were the three decoded cables, two of those before JFK was assassinated and one afterwards. And Roscoe also had what he called his Witness Elimination Program book, which was a book that he kept newspaper clipping articles, and anytime somebody died, whether it was by his hands or somebody else, he would simply run a line through their photograph in the book. And when Roscoe mysteriously died in September of '71, he admitted to his pastor, Jack Shaw, that he had killed 28 people since 1963 to cover up the death of JFK. And in his diary, which unfortunately is not in the articles at the Pogue Library anymore, that was taken by the FBI in 1988, but his son Ricky saw the diary. But in his diary, he admitted to shooting JFK from behind the picket fence, about 8 to 10 feet down the west side of the picket fence. And he also admitted to killing a police officer at 10th and Patton. Now, he does not say Officer Tippett, but he does say a police officer at 10th and Patton. And in his Witness Elimination Program book, there's the famous Mary Mormon photograph of JFK being shot with the Grassy Knoll in the background. And even though his diary is not available anymore, Roscoe has marked an X on the fence where he was actually standing at when he shot JFK. And the other thing, too, is Roscoe admitted that he, the morning of the assassination, he admitted to his wife that he had to kill JFK that day. And obviously she's like, you can't do this. And he basically said, if I don't, they're going to kill you, they're going to kill Ricky, they'll kill all of us. He goes, obviously naval intelligence knows more about it than we do, and this is my assignment. And again, the three cables that are in the library there, one is from September of '63, and it specifically says it's from naval intelligence, and it has the number 1666106, which is Roscoe White's Marine identification number. So it directly ties him into the assassination. And the September document, basically the September document just tells him that he's going to get a job at the police force, and to basically, pay attention to what's going on, and so he doesn't think a whole lot of it. It says your place is hidden within the department, which means he was in the photography area, so he wasn't, assigned to homicide or traffic. I mean, he had his free reign about himself. And then the October 63 document, this is the one that sewed it up for me. It says, foreign affairs assignments have been canceled. The next assignment is to eliminate a national security threat to worldwide peace.
Wow.
Destination will be Houston, Austin, or Dallas. Contacts are being arranged now. Orders are subject to change at any time. This one document says foreign affairs assignments have been canceled. That's them. That's naval intelligence saying we're not going to kill Fidel Castro. The next assignment is to eliminate a national security threat to worldwide peace. We're going to kill JFK.
Wow.
JFK was a peace president. He had spoken of peace many times, especially at the American University speech in June of '63.
Yeah. Fantastic speech.
His best speech ever. And he had already, made secret back channel arrangements through Khrushchev not to invade Cuba. Obviously the Cuban Missile Crisis did not occur. And bottom line, the military powers that wanted the war in Vietnam and Cuba, they basically decided that, JFK was a young kid that just couldn't be trusted and that he didn't know what he was doing. And so therefore they ordered Roscoe White to kill JFK. And even the last cable is after the assassination. It's in December of '63. And again, all of these have from Navy intelligence. All of them have 1666, 106. But the last one says, stay within the department. Witnesses have eyes, ears, and a mouth. You had nothing to do with the mix-up. The men will be in to cover all misleading evidence soon. So again, this is where he kills 28 people to cover up the assassination, and the men will be in to cover up cover up all the misleading evidence. That's basically the Warren Report. And the other thing,
I think people want some kind of a smoking gun. They want some paper saying so-and-so killed JFK at this time from this location on this date. But isn't the White evidence the closest thing we have to the proverbial smoking gun, in a sense that isn't the Roscoe White papers that you found and that Shaw found, aren't they the nearest thing we have to showing who was actually involved?
In my opinion, it is. And again, I got this from Gary Shaw, who is the first-generation researcher. Gary Shaw knew Jack Ruby. He used to frequent his carousel club. He knew, Ruby was in the mob and everything. And when I was talking to Gary when I was writing my book, and I brought up the Roscoe situation, and I brought up Jack Ruby, and I asked him, I said, when did you think something was, wrong? And he said, well, as soon as Jack Ruby killed Oswald, he goes, the fish stunk like it was high tide. He goes, I knew something, I knew something had occurred. And again, it's important to know as well with Roscoe White, okay, he wasn't just a grunt Marine, okay, this is the same guy that he served with Lee Harvey Oswald in Russia. I'm sorry, not in Japan.
Right, Japan.
Monitoring the U-2 spy planes over Russia. They took the same ship, the USS Bexar, out of San Diego to the Philippines, to mainland China, to Japan. They worked side by side for 6.5 months. They both had the highest security clearance. They both did photography as their expertise. U-2 spy planes tracking them over Russia, and it's not just a coincidence that when Oswald was arrested and they searched his property, he had over $3,000 worth of spy equipment and cameras on his property.
Wow.
Okay, $3,000 worth of spy equipment in 1963. That'd be like you and I having $40,000 to $50,000 worth of camera equipment today.
Right.
I mean, this was not just again. These guys went back for years. Okay, this was planned out years in advance. I really think that the military-industrial complex, the powers that be, I really thought that they thought that Nixon would win the election and they wouldn't have to deal with this young JFK.
Well, I'm sure that's what they were hoping for, right? I mean, it has to be to some degree.
Oh, exactly.
And where was Richard Nixon that week? If I'm correct, he was in Dallas in some capacity, was he?
Oh, yeah. He was, actually, there was a great article in the Dallas Morning News the day of the assassination, right on the front page that says Nixon says that JFK is going to drop LBJ as his running mate in 1964. He was there supposedly for as a lawyer for Pepsi Cola. They had a bottling convention there in Dallas with it. That was his excuse for being there. But the real reason why Nixon was there was he was going to Clint Murchison and H.L. Hunt to thank them for basically donating $100,000 towards this gubernatorial campaign in 1962.
Yeah, thanks.
So he was there to thank the oil men of Dallas. Like I said, he flew out of Love Field the same morning that JFK flew in. And it's ironic, too, in my book. One of the things, ST, about my book that's different than most books out there on the Kennedy assassination is I use all government documents from the FBI, from the Secret Service, from the CIA, from the Dallas Police, Dallas autopsy reports, Dallas affidavits.
Right.
I use all these documents to prove that Oswald couldn't do what the government said he did. And one of the documents that I have in my book is a FBI document from 1947 that shows that Jack Rubenstein was working on the House of Un-American Activities Committee for Congressman Richard Nixon and Congressman Lyndon B. Johnson in 1947. And when Ruby killed Oswald on November 24th, Nixon said to his servant in his apartment in New York City, he says, "I know that guy." And he's talking about Ruby.
Gosh, it would all be so laughable if it weren't just all true and factual and documented. You're a person that's researched this for 37 years, and then you have to see these fly-by-night mainstream media talking heads, faux intellectuals, faux journalists, demanding that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. Every History Channel documentary that we see demands that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. Every report by Dan Rather demands he acted alone. It has to make your head spin. And does it not just drive you crazy?
Well, the mainstream media is the biggest problem that we have in this country. And what I mean by that, ST, is, the media has never done their job in actually reporting the news, okay? Way back in the 50s, Operation Mockingbird started, which was basically a CIA program to control and influence news media, whether it was, back in the 50s, it would have been mostly radio and print. TV had not really come of age, but all the way back to the Church Committee in 1975, the CIA had a budget in 1975 of $265 million to control the media. By today's money, that would be approximately $2.1 billion. To give you an idea of how the media has just fallen asleep on this, Bob Groden, a good friend of mine, he showed the Zapruder film for the first time in 1975 on Geraldo Rivera's Late Night America talk show.
Right.
And Geraldo Rivera called it the most disturbing piece of film he's ever seen. And what we found out was that Dan Rather and CBS News have been lying to us because they said, Dan Rather said when he was looking at the Zapruder film for CBS News trying to outbid Life magazine, Dan Rather said, he ran back to, I think it's KRD News in Dallas, and goes on air after seeing the film for the first time and said, "I've just seen the film of the assassination." He goes, and at the time of the fatal headshot, JFK's head is thrown violently forward. Okay? Well, the problem is, when Bob Groden showed this film on Geraldo Rivera's program, it was exactly the opposite. It went drastically, backward and to the left.
Absolutely.
And what happened was basically the House Select Committee on Assassinations was formed. And like I said, they just found out that everybody had been lying to them for the past 12 years. And in 1979, the final results of the House Select Committee on Assassinations, based on acoustic evidence, determined there were at least 4 shots fired at JFK, with at least one of them from the front, which by definition is a conspiracy.
Yep.
And so what they did in 1979, they asked the Justice Department to open the investigation of JFK and Martin Luther King, and here we are 37 years later, and they've done nothing. Not only that, but the media has done even less. Okay? Geraldo Rivera believed in conspiracy way back in 1975, just like Bill O'Reilly believed in conspiracy in the late 70s with his report he did on Inside Edition when he was working at WFAA in Dallas, which you can find on YouTube today. However, when they're hired on at Fox News 25, 30 years later, now they're pushing the lone gunman Oswald alone theory. What changed except for the fatness of their wallets?
Right, it's maddening. It's absolutely maddening.
When you look at the media, okay, for example, you won't find a review of my book in the New York Times. You won't find a review of Bob Groden's. He's written 5 books and co-authored 9 more. You won't find a review of his books in the New York Times. You won't find a review of Beverly Oliver Masigi, an eyewitness. You won't find a review of Dr. Charles Crenshaw, a doctor that worked on Kennedy and Oswald. Okay, but whose books do you find reviews on? Bill O'Reilly's Killing Kennedy. Okay, because again, he says Oswald alone did it, and the Warren report got everything correct. Again, this is the same guy, Bill O'Reilly, who says that he was on the doorstep of George de Mohrenschildt's daughter's house in Manalapan, Florida, when de Mohrenschildt blew his brains out with a rifle. The problem with that story is he prints on his book on page 300 that that he was on the doorstep. Yet I talked to 2 different people that worked with him in Dallas, Texas, and I have the audio recording from Gaetan Fonzi, that says I'm coming down. He's calling Gaetan on the day of de Mohrenschildt's death and says, I'm coming down there tomorrow. I'm going to catch a plane. The guy's blatantly lying.
Absolutely.
Another person that gets great reviews on the New York Times, you mentioned it earlier, Gerald Posner, okay, for Case Closed. Okay, he was even nominated for a Pulitzer Prize that year.
Oh, that's sad.
For that book. Okay? And later, Posner is charged with plagiarism and actually hires Mark Lane, Lee Harvey Oswald's attorney to the Warren Commission, to defend himself and gets the charges dismissed. Okay? Posner's the same guy that a few years ago draws up papers of a fake company that he owns to get Harper Lee, the writer of To Kill a Mockingbird, to sign over her rights to Posner and this fake company and another individual. And this is when Harper Lee is in a nursing facility, an extended care facility. She can barely see.
Fantastic.
And obviously,
guy.
when her family finds out about this, they go after Posner, and again, it's dismissed. But again, he gets great reviews on the New York Times. Posner and O'Reilly, these honorable men. I always say, ST, the lie pays better than the truth. If you write a book or produce a documentary showing that Lee Oswald is guilty alone, the media will support you 100%. However, if you speak the truth, like I do in my book, you don't get one word of print in the media or the TV news.
Right.
At the 50th anniversary of the JFK assassination, I offered my services for free to all the local TV stations here in the greater Atlanta area, including CNN, which started here. And I said, go out there, cover the 50th anniversary. I'll show you the conspiracy side. I'll show you the government side. You pick what you want to show. Not a single media outlet offered to take my services for free.
Gosh, that is just incredible. Well, what happens to Lee Harvey Oswald after the motorcade rushes to Parkland? Where does he go and what does he do? There's been a lot of issues regarding time here. So what happens to Oswald after the school?
Well, according to the government, he walked almost 5 blocks.
Okay.
He caught a bus a city bus, and after it moved about 2 blocks and wasn't moving, he got off the bus and walked another 3 blocks to the Greyhound bus station where he caught a cab. And this is after giving a cab to a pregnant woman in line. He said, I'll wait for the next one. Then he took his cab out to Oak Cliff, and instead of being dropped off at his rooming house, he was actually dropped off 5 blocks away from there and walked back to the rooming house and supposedly arrived at 1 o'clock. The problem I had with that is when I was doing the research for my book, I tried to simulate Oswald's route, and I did it on 3 straight days, a Thursday, Friday, and a Saturday. And I know it's 50 years later. I know there's more traffic now, but I also know that there wasn't the murder of a president that just happened down the street either. And every time I tried to simulate the time frame, without even stopping, okay, I didn't catch a bus. I walked to the point. I walked back to the point. I didn't catch a bus. I didn't wait on a bus. I didn't wait on a cab. I went from point A to point B to point C to point D. And bottom line, the only day I was able to do it was Saturday, and I did it in 26 minutes and 40 seconds.
Nice.
According to the Warren Commission, he left the book depository at 12:33 and got to his rooming house at 1 o'clock, which is exactly 27 minutes. So I did it with 20 seconds to spare, 1 times out of 3 without anybody being killed. The other problem that I have with that is Deputy Sheriff Roger Craig claims that he saw a person that looked like Oswald get into a station wagon right on Elm Street almost immediately after the assassination. And also talking to Patricia Hall, who owns the 1026 Beckley address where Oswald's rooming house was. Her grandmother owned it in 1963, Gladys Johnson. And talking to Patricia, she was only 11 or 12-year-old kid, but she said that, a person that looked like Oswald came in at about 10 to 1. And he didn't speak. She thinks it was an imposter. I can't go that far yet. I don't know. But regardless, she said Oswald or an imposter showed up at about 10 to 1, which is impossible if he took the bus, took the cab, walked all this distance. Again, he got into the station wagon, and even after Oswald was arrested, Deputy Craig said the same thing to Captain Fritz, and Captain Fritz said, well, it sounds like the man we got here. Why don't you come down and identify him? And sure enough, Roger Craig was able to identify that was the guy that got into the station wagon.
Wow. So, who is Ruth Payne?
Ruth Payne. She was who Marina was staying with when her and Lee had separated, I believe in late September of 63. She claimed that she was helping Marina learn English so that she could learn Russian, is what Ruth said. But the problem with that is Ruth knew fluent Russian, and it was actually a teacher in Russian since 1957 back in Pennsylvania. So she wasn't learning Russian. She knew Russian very well.
Right.
And her Ruth Payne's husband, Michael, worked with Bell Helicopter, which was, again, a lot of people think this is a CIA front, and I would probably agree with that. But again, they just happen to be conveniently separated. Marina and Lee just happen to be conveniently, separated. The biggest thing that I will say about Ruth Payne, and one of the best documentaries on the Kennedy assassination, in my opinion, is Nigel Turner's The Men Who Killed Kennedy from 1988.
Oh, I absolutely agree.
And
fantastic work.
And I can't remember if it was the first episode or the second episode, because the original 5 parts in 1988, they aired over 5 different weeks. And one of the parts that struck me as unusual was, you got to realize that Oswald was arrested at the Texas Theater at 1:40. Okay, it's approximately a 20 to 25 minute drive from the Texas Theater to the municipal building downtown where the police station was in downtown Dallas with traffic. So he gets there at 2 o'clock, 2:05. It's a 10 to 15-minute process to arraign him, fingerprint him, take his mug shots. So now you're looking at 2:20, 2:25 before they even start questioning Oswald. Hey, what were you doing? Okay. So from the municipal building, the Dallas City Jail to where Ruth Payne lived out in Irving is about a 25 to 30-minute drive. Well, in this documentary, The Men Who Killed Kennedy, Ruth Payne says in the documentary that 6 police officers showed up at her door just slightly after 2 o'clock, and she said, "Come on in, I've been expecting you." Well, why would she be expecting them?
Exactly.
Because there has been no mention of his arrest. They don't have radio broadcasts of his arrest yet. They don't have TV broadcasts of his arrest yet. How did she know that to expect police officers to show up at her house, before they even interviewed Oswald? Okay, it's my opinion, ST, that the original gun, by the way, found on the 6th floor, signed by 4 different Dallas deputy sheriffs in an affidavit, was a 7.65 Mauser. And you can go to YouTube today, and for 36 hours after the assassination, they're describing the bullet was a Mauser. The gun was a Mauser. It was a 7.65 German Mauser. Walter Cronkite, Dan Rather, they're all talking about this Mauser. Well, when they couldn't tie the Mauser to Oswald, all of a sudden it morphed into a 6.5 Mannlicher Carcano Italian rifle. Okay, it's my viewpoint that Ruth Payne delivered that gun that morning to the Dallas police in one form or the other. Whether she took it to the police department, met an off-duty police officer, she took that gun that morning because, again, in her Warren Commission testimony, she says the morning of the assassination that, she went to the grocery store. She said she went to the grocery store on Thursday, on Friday, on Saturday. This woman buys a lot of groceries, evidently. But she also claimed that her little girl had a dentist appointment, and said that she didn't get back to to her house until 11:30 to 12. Again, she was out of the house for 2.5 to 3 hours. She had plenty of time to deliver this weapon to the Dallas police.
Yeah.
I find Ruth and Michael Payne very suspect.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even without the gun, I read in your book that you believe that the Paynes were intentionally placed in Lee Harvey Oswald's life. So, is that true?
Most definitely. Again, she's learning Russian, even though she already knows it. Oswald and Marina know Russian. Another person, George de Mohrenschildt, who is a very successful, wealthy oil businessman, he knows Russian. How many people knew Russian back then? Okay, in 1960s Dallas,
a lot apparently. Huh?
George de Mohrenschildt, who's a rich socialite that actually even knew Jackie Kennedy's sister.
Right.
You've got the Paynes, who are definitely CIA, in my opinion, and you got the Oswalds that are supposedly, the lowest rung on the ladder. Yet all 3 of these people are hanging out together. That just doesn't match up. The only tie to all 3 of these people is the Russian language and intelligence. I don't believe this was just a fluke of nature that they all knew Russian, and like I said, I just don't even believe that for 1 second.
No, and once again, anti-communists surround Oswald. Aside from the things happening in Dealey Plaza and the schoolbook depository that day, what are the strongest pieces of evidence that lead to his innocence?
Well, the biggest thing is in my book. The Dallas police couldn't find fingerprints on the rifle or the pistol that he supposedly used to kill Kennedy and Tippit. And even though the FBI didn't have jurisdiction, they sent the rifle and the pistol to the FBI, figuring, of course, they've got better, sophisticated equipment. They'll be able to find fingerprints. And again, in my book, there's a document signed by J. Edgar Hoover on November 23rd, the day after the assassination, that basically says we don't have any fingerprints on, the rifle. We don't have any fingerprints on the pistol, on the unfired cartridge, the clip in the rifle, the inner parts of the rifle. I mean, they have no proof of any fingerprints anywhere on this weapon the day after the assassination. And that, along with Jesse Curry saying, we don't have a motive for Oswald shooting the president, and, we can't put him in the sixth floor window.
Right.
And Oswald's testimony that he was on the, ground floor watching the motorcade out front with Bill Shelley, they had no evidence. And here's the other thing, too, is Jim Lavelle, the officer that was handcuffed to Oswald, and Jim Lavelle is a great guy. Just a few days ago was the 75th anniversary of Pearl Harbor. Jim Lavelle was actually at Pearl Harbor, stationed on the USS Whitney, less than a mile from the Arizona. But Jim Lavelle said to me for the first time I met him in 1988, he said to me, he goes, Gary, Oswald would have never been found guilty, for murdering Tippit and Kennedy based on the evidence we had at the time of his death. Okay, and this is a guy that still to this day, he's 96 years old, he's sharp as a tack, still drives, okay? He still thinks Oswald is guilty of something, but for him to say to me he would have never been found guilty in 1963 based on the evidence that we had at the time of his death, I mean, they didn't have a case, but they still let Oswald stay in jail for Jack Ruby to kill him.
So Oswald is known for one line that has become an indelible part of our history. I'm just a patsy. But for whom and why him? Why Lee Harvey Oswald out of everyone? And who made him a patsy?
He was, again, getting back to him and Roscoe White both being naval intelligence, both having the highest security clearance. They were... he was set up by our own U.S. government from the very beginning. And I tell people all the time, SC, I speak at these conferences, I speak at, high schools, I speak at colleges, I speak, all over the place. And I tell people all the time, ST, no matter who you think killed JFK, let's say you think Oswald did it alone. Let's say your best friend says, well, Oswald did it with an accomplice. And then somebody else says, oh, no, it was the mafia. Oh, no, it was the KGB. Oh, no, it was Castro that did it.
Right.
There were, 4 things that happened that weekend that only our U.S. government could control. And that was, 1, the parade route was changed as little as 1 day, as many as 3 days ahead of the motorcade. Now, the only people that can change the parade route are either Dallas city officials, but they still have to have approval through the Secret Service. Oswald alone couldn't change the parade route. Neither could an accomplice. Neither could the KGB. Neither could, Russia. Neither could, the mafia. The second thing that happened is, the Secret Service violated 16 different rules of presidential protection just on the Fort Worth, Dallas part of the trip.
Wow.
Okay. The rules of presidential protection in 1963 were if the car slows down less than 44 miles an hour or turns more than a 90-degree angle, you have to have Secret Service agents on the running boards of the car to protect the president from field of fire from the front, the back, and the side. Okay? Not only did they not do that, but they turned the car at the very last second 120 degrees from Houston onto Elm. Okay? Here's the biggest thing. It wasn't a federal crime to assassinate the president in 1963.
Right, it wasn't.
So when the Secret Service illegally removed his body from Parkland, they violated Texas law. The entire autopsy, the entire investigation should have been handled by Dallas County authorities, and they weren't. Okay, they were the Secret Service literally had their hands on their guns in Parkland Hospital, telling Dr. Earl Rose, "Get out of the way, or we're going to run you over or shoot you, one of the two." And then, bottom line, the final straw is, again, Johnson appoints the Warren Commission to basically cover it up. None of those things could have been done by Oswald and the accomplice, the mafia, Castro, Khrushchev. It all points right back to our own government.
Oh, it absolutely does. Now, you spoke to a Captain Swindle. Is that correct? Who's Captain Swindle?
Yeah, James Swindle. He was the pilot of Air Force One. And I think it was May 4th of 1999. It might have been May 5th. But they finally retired Sam 26,000, which was the Air Force One that JFK's body was brought back on. They retired it at the presidential hangar at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. And I was born in Dayton, Ohio. I grew up about 30 miles from there. So to me, it was just a cool thing to go back and see it happen, see some family, and at the same time possibly get a interview Captain Swindle. And I was fortunate enough to spend about 15 minutes with him. And, you know, I didn't ask him what his thoughts were that day, how he felt, the emotions. The one question I asked him was, I said, you know, Captain Swindle, I said, you know, and again, when he flew in on the final day when they retired that plane, he wasn't at the controls. He was just in the cockpit. But I asked him, I said, if you had to manually lower the landing gear of this plane, how would you do it? And he goes, I'd have, you know, my first officer or my co-pilot. He goes, you can go back into the back of the plane. He goes, and there's a little hatch door in the floorboard of the plane, and you got a key to open it up, and it's kind of like a soda machine or a safe type of key. You know, it's one of those little coded things. And he goes, you would just open that hatch up. He goes, and crawl down into the cargo area of the plane. He goes, and from there you can manually lower the landing gear down. And so I asked him, I said, well, can you show me where that is at? And he takes me back there, and it's maybe 5 to 6 feet from where JFK's coffin was.
Wow.
So it's my opinion because, again, the Secret Service illegally removed his body from Parkland. It's my opinion that when Jackie, Evelyn Lincoln, JFK's secretary, and Dave Powers, his aide, were asked to come forward for the swearing-in ceremony of Johnson, I believe there were people in the cargo area of the plane that came up through that floorboard area, took JFK's body out, put it into, it was wrapped in sheets, put it into a body bag so that no blood or anything would get anywhere, and either put, you know, oxygen tanks or sandbags or something in the casket to simulate the weight. And the reason why I say that is they didn't know if the Dallas police were going to show back up and say, hey, you can't take this body. This is a crime in Dallas County. So they could have easily asked for the casket back. And if they would have done that, I don't believe that the Dallas officials would have opened the casket again in front of Jackie. I think they would have just lifted it up and they would have feel, well, that feels like a body in there. And they would have taken it off the plane. And by the time that they got to Parkland Hospital for Dr. Rose to do the autopsy, Air Force One would have been airborne, and they realized they didn't have a body.
Wow. Absolutely. And I mean, this whole story has so many links and so many webs, and we'll definitely have to talk again. But it's a vast story.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and here's the other thing, too, ST, is Hubert Clark, who was on the honor guard at Andrews Air Force Base when the body came back, and he was part of the honor guard that literally carried the casket to the morgue, from the morgue back to the White House, from the White House to the Capitol, from the Capitol to St. Matthews to Arlington Cemetery. Okay, this guy was, you know, always involved with carrying the casket, and it wasn't until a few years ago that he actually got together with the people in the morgue, Dennis David, James Jenkins, Gerald Custer, Seibert and O'Neill from the FBI, and realized that, hey, you know, the guys that are in the morgue saw a different body and a different casket show up. There's actually on record through the Assassination Records Review Board, there's 3 different times that the casket showed up at the autopsy. So, you know, which one do you believe?
Right, and the question of who you believe not only really permeates and guides this whole case, but also every historical mystery that we sort of have at this time. And researchers like you have conducted decades of interviews and have searched for documents. The Noam Chomsky and Gerald Posner and the John McAdams of the world just sort of by the Warren Commission. What work are you currently doing to further this case? What work are you doing that we should know about and that you want everyone to know?
Well, I'm starting my next book, which is all going to be completely about Roscoe White and his involvement and relationship with naval intelligence and Lee Harvey Oswald. But what I'm currently working on are two different projects. One is with five-time Emmy Award winner John Barber. It's a weird thing, ST. I wrote this book, and I never expected it to be that popular or even sell that well. But all of a sudden, I had, and I asked people. I asked Philip Nelson. I asked Roger Stone. Beverly Oliver to write reviews of my book. So I sent them, digital copies ahead of time. But after my book was done, I started getting orders from John Barber. I started getting orders from Douglas Caddy, who was the attorney for E. Howard Hunt and the Watergate burglars, and Billy Saul Estes.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
I started getting orders from Bar McClellan, who was LBJ's personal attorney from 1967 until his death in 73. And it just amazed me that, these people are buying my book and going, wow, you really hit the nail on the head here.
Well, let me say,
so what I'm working on.
Let me say that after reading The Innocence of Oswald and meeting you in Dallas, you deserve every accolade that you get, Gary, all of them.
Well, I appreciate that, ST. I've just, like I said, I've been studying it now for close to 37 years, and my joke is it only took me 35 years to get noticed.
Oh gosh, well, I think, I think that you're on the map now.
But I mean, the current thing that I'm working on. We just had our first screening of the Jim Garrison tapes, Part 2 with John Barber, and I'm also working with Myra Bronstein, Brian Lloyd, Joe Sotilli, several others, Lena Sanek. there's Gino Morani. There's several people.
Fantastic people.
There's about 5 or 6 of us working with John Barber, and it's like I said, it's the follow-up to his Jim Garrison tapes, and it's called The American Media and the Second Assassination of President John F. Kennedy. And it basically, you were there for the screening. It basically shows how the media has lied and covered this up for 53 years.
It absolutely does.
And the other thing that I'm working on, is, again, LBJ's personal attorney, Bar McClellan, contacted me close to a year ago. And he said to me, he goes, I always knew LBJ was involved. He goes, but I always thought Oswald had some sort of role. He goes, I didn't know if LBJ knew about Oswald or the government. He goes, but I just figured, he had some sort of role in it. And after reading my book, Bar McClellan said to me, he goes, all the documentation that you have, he goes, Oswald was set up the entire time. And I said, yeah. And so what Bar McClellan and I are working on now is a series of presidential medals of honors, some pardons, and eventually a commutation for Lee Harvey Oswald because he never went to trial, so we can't get him a pardon, but we can get him a commutation, basically stating that he didn't do it. And I know it's an uphill, battle.
Right.
I'm 52 years old. My parents told me they walked both ways to school uphill in the snow. So I know that's what I'm facing as well. But you got to have something to believe in, and this is with the faith of people like John Barber and Bar McClellan. That's what I'm doing.
Well, I definitely believe in your work, and I definitely believe that our readers should read your work. So what can they do other than buying all the books? Here's the call to action. What can our listeners do?
Biggest thing would be to sign my petition at my website. It's if you go to www.theinnocenceofoswald.com, There's tabs going across the top. Go over to the tab Justice for Lee Oswald. Click on that, scroll down, sign the petition. Anybody 13 years or older can sign the petition. You have to state your name, your email address, that you're at least 13 years or older, and a phone number. And here's the thing. If you have 100,000 signatures, you don't even need the Justice Department's approval to take it to the president. However, let's say we do go to the Justice Department. The person in charge of signing off on the presidential pardons used to be the former director of the JFK Library in Boston. Okay? With President-elect Trump coming into office, Roger Stone, who wrote a fabulous review of my book on my back cover, is his right-hand man. With Trump in office, Roger Stone is right-hand man, hopefully getting 100,000 signatures or more, and having a Department of Justice attorney that used to be at the JFK Library. There's never going to be a better opportunity to get justice for Lee Harvey Oswald and his family.
You're absolutely right. So Gary Fannin, author of The Innocence of Oswald, here's a section of our show where we're going to do the top 5, and you're going to be the first one to do the top 5. So we're going to ask you, I'm sure, what's going to be a hard question for you. If you had to narrow it down to someone starting to read about the JFK assassination, and they want 5 books, what 5 books regarding the JFK assassination, other than yours, The Innocence of Oswald, what 5 books would you suggest that they read?
Well, I don't know if I can do it in just 5, but well, I mean, there obviously, again, there's a lot of good books. I would say one of the ones that I always direct people to, are the originals. Mark Lane's 1967 Rush to Judgment and the film that he did. And the reason why I say that is, Mark Lane was hired by Marguerite Oswald to represent her dead son to the Warren Commission.
Right.
Okay. Unfortunately, Mark passed away this past March, but just a phenomenal guy.
Historical.
I would say Crossfire by Jim Mars.
Great work.
I would say On the Trail of the Assassins by Jim Garrison. Those are the 2 books that Oliver Stone used for the basis of his movie JFK. A great book by James Douglas, JFK and the Unspeakable. And basically what this book does, it ties in how the military and industrial complex and the war machinery and the money behind it needed JFK out of office. Another great book would be Barb McClellan's Blood, Money, and Power.
Absolutely.
Which basically, again, shows LBJ's involvement through the Ed Clark law firm that he worked for, who was Johnson's attorney since the early 1940s. Like I said, Bob Groden's book, The Killing of a President. Bob's got 5 books. The Killing of a President, Absolute Proof. Bob Groden was the photographic expert for the House Select Committee on Assassinations. He got the Warren Commission. He got the Zapruder film shown on national TV. He still today sells his books and DVDs in Dealey Plaza every weekend. Great guy, great friend. Like I said, I could name 20 more books, but I won't do that. I won't bore your readers.
Well, it is a top 5 for a reason. So.
Well, and I do have on my website, I do have a research links, which has a bunch of websites that I recommend. You can go on the websites that'll give you the entire Warren Commission, the entire House Select Committee on Assassinations, all the photographic expertise, Mary Farrell's site. Gary Shaw's site. Bob Groden's. I've got probably 25, 30 links on there that you can go to as well. And the other thing I'll say too. Yeah, the other thing I would say too, ST, is even if they don't buy my book, you can go on my website and see probably 25 to 30% of the photographs and the documents that I have in the book. And once you look at them and you just open your mind and go, there ain't no way this happened the way they said it did.
Right.
It's just mind-blowing. Like I said, it only took me 35 years to get recognized, so hopefully I've got another 35 years in me to get this accomplished.
I certainly hope so, Gary. And this has been Gary Fannin, author of The Innocence of Oswald and the innocence-of-oswald.com. Please go to his site. Please buy his book. There's a link on the MidnightRiderNews.com website. And our audience is going to know inevitably, and what they want to know is if they want to contact you, Gary, how can they do so? Now, you're open to so many questions about Oswald and JFK and the whole story. So if they want to contact you about that, or if they have a link, or if they know someone, how would they contact you?
Again, once they go to the website, there's a contact us page. Or they can also just email me at admin, ADMIN, at the Innocence of Oswald. I talk to everybody. Like I said, it's humbling to me that, I just had Dr. Cyril Weck send me a wonderful review 2 days ago.
Oh, that's nice.
It's just amazing to me, the people that are reaching out to me. But, again, the people that are interested in this, even if you don't believe 100% of what I have in my book or my website, that's fine. Ask a question. I'll give you my viewpoint. From there, research it yourself. Look at 2 or 3 different viewpoints and say, hey, I believe Gary or I don't. And that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. Like I said, I love Bob Groden. I love, the earlier researchers. I don't believe 100% of everything they all say, but you know what? You can't deny the fact that we wouldn't be talking about this assassination 53 years later if it weren't for people like Mark Lane, Bob Groden, Gary Shaw, Jim Mars, Jim Garrison. Again, you don't have to believe 100%, but I'll give you my honest opinion. And, bottom line, if you butt heads with me a little bit and say, well, I don't believe that, well, then I'm going to show you my documented proof on that. And if you don't believe me then, well, maybe you've got other sources that you like better. I'm not going to purposely, cause a confrontation. I want people to be informed. I'm taking a group, I'm taking a group of high school kids out to Dallas in January for a week, and we're doing an entire symposium on the JFK assassination with 16, 17-year-old kids.
Oh, that'll be fun.
These kids are going to get to meet Beverly Oliver. They're going to get to meet Bob Groden, Gary Shaw, Dr. McClellan, Patricia Hall. They're going to stand in the Oswald rooming house. They're going everywhere. It's just my way of promoting it forward. I'm 52 years old, but the film that I'm working on with John Barber and these other individuals, we need to get the millennials, the 16, 20, 25-year-old people involved in this assassination.
We absolutely do. And once again, his name is Gary Fannin. He's the author of The Innocence of Oswald and the innocence-of-oswald.com. So, Gary, I just want to say thank you very much for being on the show. And again, it was so great to meet you in Dallas, and it was so great to hang out with you for 3 days, and we just had a fantastic time, and I'm sure it will not be our last. Thank you so much for being here, Gary.
ST, thank you very much, and you can let your audience know as well. They can obviously get it at Amazon as well.
They absolutely can. They can get it at Amazon.com. They can get it at the Midnight Rider News website. And this has been Gary Fannin. I'm ST Patrick. I'll be right back. And once again, this is ST Patrick of MidnightRiderNews.com, and I want to thank Juliet Toth and Gary Fannin for being on the first episode of the Midnight Rider News podcast. The assassination of John Kennedy was a turning point for me. As a young student, I was a believer in my teachers, my textbooks, and my media. When I began learning about the Kennedy assassination, my mind really began opening for the first time. It was and has been a very freeing experience. Robert Groden was the first author that I purchased, but Jim Mars was my most important. It was Mars who really taught me the possibilities as well as the hidden evidence. Or if not hidden, at least silenced by the media. Silenced by the mainstream media. Today, I no longer believe that Oswald acted alone. Today, I no longer believe that Oswald acted at all. It's a theme that will traverse the show for as long as there is a show, but we have to support those who are doing great, important work. buy the Kennedy assassination books. Tonight, go to MidnightRiderNews.com and buy Gary Fannin's The Innocence of Oswald. Support those websites who do the work that you so often read. Purchase the documentaries that are attempting to somehow fit a thread of truth through a tunnel of muck. It's been an honor and a pleasure to come to you tonight. Please visit our site, MidnightRiderNews.com, and help in any way that you can. Until next time, I'm St. Patrick, and from the other side of the mountain, on the best side of midnight, I wish you peace. Have a good night.